Okay, this is Instructor Mr. White. I hopefully make this a short one. Um, I actually the commenting about the on first looking into Chapman's Homer discussion yesterday. I thought once again that went great. I'm very impressed by how well you guys are doing on those discussion boards, especially how well you're sort of helping each other, helping explain things to each other. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And the it, especially a number of people posted information that they'd found through research. So there are aspects of the poem that weren't easy to read at first. The metaphor at the beginning of the poem was something that might have been something you could miss. Refer back again to that video, the integrity that I posted yesterday, and integrity in YouTube that I posted yesterday about explaining exactly how the controlling metaphor works in the poem. But also the references, who was Keats, who was Chapman, especially who was Chapman. I think many of us have heard of Keats. There was a movie, I think a couple of years ago, that was a romantic story of Keats's life. And but the Chapman is pretty obscure. I think there are plenty of English majors and even English teachers that don't know exactly who Chapman was. But folks went out into the internet and they found information about that. And I'm going to bet it wasn't that difficult to do. You do a Google search on the poem title and you'll come up with in the first page, some pretty good sources for the most part. This is a general rule of thumb that can apply to all sorts of things. The internet is great for researching all sorts of things, and not just in English classes, not just poems that have difficult references or anything like that. All sorts of situations where you're forced to try to figure something out, rather than, you can go to the internet and get help on it. We've got a 14-year-old daughter, and quite often when we're trying to help her with her math homework, neither my wife and I know this stuff, but we go onto the internet, and if you do in the right search term, you can usually find something that gives you a decent explanation of what's going on. So definitely in this class, don't hesitate to use the internet to help you understand things. And I think in other classes and even other life situations, it's a great tool. A couple folks, I'm sorry, I should have written the name from the discussion board. Someone said that the poem represented an epiphany, and I made some response comments on that. I think that's very true. So epiphany is sort of a moment of a revelation, like at a moment when the truth made an appearance. Something daunting. It's in the cartoons, it was the light bulb over the head. That's an epiphany there. And I think that's a great way of describing the poem. He had this sudden realization of just how wonderful the Homer could be. And then notice that the two images at the end of the poem, the two similes, where he compares his experience to the astronomer who's seeing a planet for the first time. That is a moment of discovery. And then, of course, the famous Cortez looking out at the Pacific. And that was another moment of discovery. And very much in this, I really like the Cortez scene at the end. The idea of him just standing there with eagle eyes staring at the ocean. And his men, they're looking at each other. It's sort of a, hey, the boss seems a bit freaked out right now. But they have a sense they know why he's freaked out. They too share in this excitement, and they're looking at each other and just the wild surmise. They can't even begin to imagine what new sort of, half the world lies before them right there, opening up. Some of you may have caught this in your internet research. An interesting side note about the poem is, in reality, it was not Cortez who first saw the Pacific Ocean, first European to see the Pacific Ocean. It was Balboa. So interestingly, Keats got the thing wrong. However, this poem is in regular meter, means he has to have 10 syllables per line, and he has to have a certain cadence of stresses, the iambic, da da. And when Stout Cortez, or like Stout Cortez when with eagle eyes, he he spied the Pacific. Da 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 da. Cortez works in that line. Balboa wouldn't work in that line because Balboa's got um, three syllables, so the extra syllable would mess his line up. So Cortez, even though it's not historically accurate, it's poetically accurate. And then, okay, so that's it for the Keats. Now, I want to do one follow-up, and this is on, I went back last night, and there were some later comments on the variations on a theme discussion board, and I responded to some people's posts there, but I want to talk to you guys all about it, because I think it's something that applies not just to that poem and our thoughts about that poem, but it applies to all writing and our writing in general. And this is sort of one piece of practical advice that your writing teacher can give you. And someone made a great observation about how they thought that the Williams poem was humorous, but that the Koch poem was sarcastic. And I asked, and this was an honest question. I mean, I asked this because I'm not 100% sure of the answer, and I'd be very curious to know what kind of answer you guys, the person I was asking, could come up with. And what in the words of the Koch poem makes it sarcastic? What specifically, if we had to pinpoint, what is it making that sarcastic? And I think that's an open question, and it's not an easy question to answer because it's difficult to figure out just exactly how that that's expressed. And the difficulty of answering that question serves as a starting point, or as a good piece of information, fact, data point, from which I can give you a warning about your own writing, especially professional writing, and especially professional writing in email. It's hard to point to what exactly in the poem makes it sarcastic. I suspect it has to do with the content. I think that the things that he's talking about, it would have to be a psychotic, monster for those to actually literally be true. So you're thinking that can't be literally true. We expect that this person saying this poem has got to be, a decent human being, a fairly decent human being, so they must be terribly exaggerating. So this has to be some kind of joke. And I think that's how we get the sarcasm. So it's from the content of what's being said, and we compare that content to what we expect of the people that we meet, or the people that we come across, or whose words we come across. Okay, sarcasm then is a version of what you can call irony. Okay, when we speak of figures of speech, and I'm referring back to that presentation I gave earlier about figures of speech, irony is a figure of speech. It basically means where you say one thing and you mean something else. So sarcasm is a version that I say one thing, but I mean the exact opposite of what I say. So the example I like to use is, so my brother and I are on a carpentry project, and my brother asks me to hand him the hammer, and I'm above him on the ladder, and I accidentally drop it on his head. Okay, and he says, "Thank you." Now, the words he says are expressing gratitude, right? But that's not what he means. He means the exact opposite. He means no thanks, or you stupid idiot. Why on earth did you drop that on my head? And you're, once again, a knucklehead for doing something like that. So he means the exact opposite of what he says. So that's how verbal irony works. That's how sarcasm works. When we speak, okay, we have tone of voice. And so we can identify irony pretty well, sarcasm pretty well, because it's usually fairly over the top. There's some people that do a very good job of sort of a deadpan, not giving away whether they're being ironic or not with their voice. Oddly enough, my brother's actually very good at that, and sometimes it can be hard to tell exactly what it is that he means to say, because you don't know whether he means the words that he's saying or he means the exact opposite of them. So it's very hard. He's a humorous person, and it's hard to know when he's being sincere or not. But for the most part, in speech, that we can recognize irony. In writing, however, it can be very difficult, okay? And so it can be very difficult to tell in some situations whether the person was joking or not. And this can be actually a serious problem when it comes to emails and then comment boards, message boards on websites. Now, message boards on websites are usually, for the most part, they're usually anonymous, something like a Reddit or something like that. And just because, you start a misunderstanding or a flame war or whatever they're calling it nowadays, when people start arguing back and forth, it can take up a lot of your sort of emotional um, energy or a lot of your time, but it's not the end of the world. It's just anonymous people sort of cursing at each other on the internet. However, with emails in professional situations, that actually can have serious repercussions. And I had a student last quarter who'd worked at a job, and she was in kind of corporate administration, and she said one of her tasks, and it was not a pleasant task. She was sort of part of the group of people that was sort of in charge of firing people. So sort of processing the necessary paperwork to terminate employees. And she said the most common reason employees got terminated were for inappropriate emails. And in a lot of the cases that the employees thought, or at least they claimed that they thought, that they were being funny, but they were being sarcastic. They said one thing and they meant the opposite. Well, the problem was the literal thing that they meant was a terribly inappropriate, offensive, hurtful, hateful, stuff like that. But supposedly they didn't mean it. They meant it, they wanted it to be a joke. Well, this is exactly the problem, though. It's the same thing that happens on the message boards, the same things that can happen on email. In writing, it can be very difficult to tell when someone is joking or not. And you yourself may have had experience with that. Someone sending you an email, or you read something on the internet and you thought it was something serious, but it turns out to be a joke. This actually, I just saw this in the news recently. There are these, they're the comic news sites like The Onion and such that are always publishing these kind of satiric, sarcastic versions of the news stories, comic, fictional versions of news stories. And every couple months or so, there's a report that someone, some politician somewhere, some other news source somewhere, uses one of these funny, sarcastic news stories as if it were true. They seemingly don't recognize that it's a joke, and they report on it that it's actually true. Okay, so again, to show you how these things can be, irony can be very difficult to pick up on in writing. Okay, because you don't have tone of voice to work with. So one piece of practical advice for you guys is, in a professional situation, do not ever be ironic in your emails, okay? It's difficult to do, and even if you do it well, it's difficult for the other side to pick up, and you might write very well, but your readers don't get it, and you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. So that's one piece of it, practical advice that I can offer you. All right, I'll talk to you soon. I'm looking forward to seeing your guys' paragraphs.